IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police forces. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Police Chowki. I'm your host Shrikrishna Upadhyaya, and today we'll be talking about women and policing. More specifically, the interface between women and police on one hand and the lives of women serving in the police forces on the other. Throughout the course of my chat today with the guests, we'll be evaluating the state policies that mandate the roles of women in police. For example, we'll be tackling questions like how does the inclusion of women influence the overall effectiveness of a police force? Does the representation change the dynamics of law enforcement and lead to creation of a more gender-sensitive system? Or how do certain social perceptions on women working in police stack up against their actual performance and experience in the course of service? Our guest on the show today, Mr. Javeed Ahmad, ex-IPS and former DGP of Uttar Pradesh. He's been with me throughout the series, Police Chowki. And also we have a special guest on the show today, Ms. Sutapa Sanyal, former IPS officer who has also served as a DGP in Uttar Pradesh. And apart from her experience in the Indian police force, she also has vast experience and body of work in the field surrounding initiatives for tackling women, violence against women and children. And she's also an independent consultant on issues like diversity and inclusion, POSH, leadership, and gender equality. So a warm welcome to both of you, Mr. Ahmed and Ms. Sanyal.
Thank you, Shri Krishna.
Yes.
And good morning, Javeed.
Good morning, and thank you, Sri. Good to be back here for this very interesting issue, and I'm sure Sutapa, my former colleague, will add huge value to the discussions today.
Sure. So thank you once again for being on board for this discussion. And without further ado, let's begin by looking a little bit at the interface of women with the police force, right? So the way I understand it is, so women police officers under our criminal justice system have certain exclusive functions which is given by law, right? And these, for example, include the fact that women police officers are supposed to register FIRs and record statements of victims under several sections of the penal code as well as POCSO whenever the victim happens to be of sexual assault. Or women police officers are also mandated with the duty of investigating such offences. And in other cases where the culprit or the accused might be a woman, then women police officers are duty bound to conduct the search and seizure of such suspects, right? At the same time, at a more institutional level, there is also a mandate that every state sets up a help desk for women exclusively in every police station. But the fact on the ground is only about 60% of the police stations in the country have set this up. Some states have also taken the initiative to set up women's police stations, which are again exclusively sort of women personnel who are stationed in such police stations. So the question to both of you I want to begin with is by asking, has this kind of a state policy actually helped in creating a more gender-sensitive police system? And is this assumption that, women police officers are better equipped for investigating into cases which involve violence against women and children, is this assumption actually backed by actual practice? Because women police officers are also cut from the same cloth as society, which might carry many of the prejudices against
Should I answer,
women. So
Javeed?
how has the experience been?
So there are a couple of issues which you have raised in this question of yours about the creation of women help desks. Yes, they are the figures which you are talking of. And these have kind of, evolved over a period of time in the criminal justice system and there are other platforms also, like you have the She Box, you have for sexual harassment complaints, you have the E-Box for POCSO complaints, you have helplines, you have those one-stop centers, which were all created with the idea that, okay, women must speak up if a crime has been committed against them. Now this becomes very, very important if we understand the social structure, the cultural structure that women live in. there is a huge culture of silence. There is a huge culture of victim blaming, with the result that many women are unable to reach the police stations for complaining. Even if they reach, they kind of feel shy about talking about what has happened to them, especially in cases of personal violation, sexual assault, etc. Third, they feel more comfortable if there is a woman who is listening to them at the other end. Now, about the question whether it has helped in creating a more gender sensitive police system. Well, see, I have certain thoughts about this. I feel that we think that only women can be sensitive to women's issues, right? No, sensitivity is something which is very, very personal, very, very individual to a person, in this case, a police personnel. A man can be very sensitive, a woman can also be insensitive, right? Because these are, as you said, they carry cut from the same fabric as the others, and the police is also coming from a social milieu which kind of values women less. So that misogyny and patriarchy being there, right, it is carried into the system also. So now there is another fact that misogyny and patriarchy, they don't have any gender. It's a mental attitude. It's just an attitude, and it can happen to anybody. Anybody can be plagued, whether it's a man or a woman, they can be plagued by misogynistic thoughts, by patriarchal thoughts. So the more important thing is, if we are having all exclusive women help desks, and many people even within the system are against it. Many women police officers are against it because they feel, it stereotypes, as you said, it stereotypes women personnel. So the more important thing is how many and who is manning these help desks. Now, if you see, so far as the demography is concerned, women are around 50% of the population. And if you consider this to be a woman and child help desk, so children are around 38 to 40%. Of course, there will be certain, cross currents. So if you are catering to this bigger size of the population, then you need to man or woman those help desks with the optimal staff, right? And then what type of people are manning those help desks? Are they sensitive? Are they aware? Are they willing to walk the extra mile and not consider any victim or survivor who is sitting in front as a mere piece of paper, as a mere, form in police for drafting the FIR and filling up other things? That person has to be sensitive and to respond to the victim with every bit of sensitivity and compassion. So if you have the right number of people and if you have the right kind of people, there is no reason why these help desks will not succeed. The fact that only, kind of 60% of the police stations have these help desks means that something is amiss, right? And that would largely be the number of women police, because as you know, about 8 to 10% only are the women personnel in the entire police system. So where do we get these women for these help desks? Having said that, I also have reservation about only having women at the women help desks. Why not men? If there are men who are sensitive enough to these issues, we must onboard them, right? And then when you ask about the assumption that women officers are better suited only for such duties if there are these women help desks, yes, to a large extent, it can cause stereotyping, right? Because these are schemas. We all have biases, each one of us. So there can be a feeling, a perception that, okay, women cannot do the other things, the kind of tough duties. So they have been put into the soft duties. Much depends upon the leadership in the police system. If the message goes out clearly that, look, this is a specialized kind of work. We are putting specialized people. We are putting committed people. We are putting people who are aware and sensitive and compassionate towards victims. then it's a different story altogether. But if the message sent out from within the system itself or from the department that, look, this is a kind of punishment posting, this is a kind of grade B activity, because these people cannot do the grade A activities, which is active district policing, right? Then
Right.
it's a different story. So we have to be very careful about what message we send out, what message the department, the organization sends out. And I remember, Javeed, long time back in our ACRs, we used to have a column about the sensitivity towards women's issues and
Correct.
other, yeah. So not that the police doesn't recognize, but we have to walk the talk. The department has to walk the talk, right? How it will do it, that they need to find out. Maybe, felicitating such women or the personnel who are at the women help desk to show that, okay, this is a very important part of policing and we pay a lot of attention to this. So those things come in. Then we also need to remember that, just a change on the side of the police won't help. The general perception, these are not, we don't have linear solutions to these problems. Certain things have to be simultaneous as well as sequential, right? So simultaneously, the people also, the society also has to accept that, okay, women's issues are equally important. Okay, there is patriarchy, so the department is taking care of it, trying to find solutions through these methods, right? And women also need to be aware of things around them. And they, I always feel that they also have to self-empower, right? So it's a whole, there are a lot of stakeholders. So it's not just the police. A part of also has to come from the society. So change will only happen when, I always say that it's a kind of an escape velocity. Social change also needs an escape velocity. So when you're asking this question, it has to be an effort from both the sides. Then only these, additional methods which are trying to, kind of cajole women to come and speak up, only then they will be successful. Yeah.
So there are a lot of things I want to double click on, and a couple of issues that you flag posted, such as representation of women or stereotyping women officers in certain roles within their jobs. I'll come to that in a little bit. And before
Yeah.
that, I actually wanted to know from you, since you mentioned the bit about ACRs and them actually recording whether a police officer is sensitive enough towards women or having some kind of criteria to assess this aspect of their job performance. So other than that, and my question is to both of you, again. So other than that, are there any other such institutional steps which has been taken by police forces that you're aware of, where there is a conscious effort made by the police leadership to inculcate a certain kind of behavioral norm towards women victims who approach police, or to ensure that such cases are also taken up with equal seriousness?
I think at the leadership level, Sutapa, if you don't mind, I'll start with that. Across all police forces in the country now, I think there is increasing realization and sensitivity to the need and the requirement of better, arrangements being made at the institutional level for women safety and for such women who decide to approach the police either at the thana or any other level. So that is, it's a move forward, if I can call it that. But you have to also, realize that, as just said, the social cultural environment that prevails is an overall hangover or a on whatever efforts the police is making. Secondly, the fact is that in the last 20, 25 years, many more women are now coming into the public space, either to teach, to work, or to study, or to do any other thing, or to shop or whatever, and they're doing it alone. The Indian public spaces don't have that kind of arrangement yet. And the Indian public, that is the mostly the Indian male, is not used to this kind of change in what was exclusively his domain. The chauraha and the corner, street corner was the exclusive domain of men. They could do whatever. Now there are women coming, going, school children, working women, etc., etc. So they also have to get used to their space being now shared by women. So that process is a time-taking process. We cannot wait for that social change to happen for giving justice and equity to women. The police department, as other departments of the government, are all doing their bit. The process is on. It's slow, but definitely it's on.
Yeah, I feel now there is a concept, may not be very clear cut, but there is a concept of what is called gender budgeting. Like
Right.
in provisioning also, and I remember specifically in one of the forces, the central forces, when a woman DIG took charge of the provisioning, right, there was a huge change in the body protectors. Initially, they were made for the male, body, male anatomy. But now the women are also into law and order, right? So it was a very clumsy thing which they had to put on. So it started with one of the central forces, I think it was the CRPF. And they designed a body protector which was more friendly to the anatomy of a woman, right? And then it became much easier for the women to control the crowd, etc., and perform their law and order duties. So these things, these tiny bits of awareness, they are creating changes, they are creating ripples. But as Javeed said, it won't be easy and it won't be very fast. But so far as the leadership is concerned, the leadership needs to take a holistic view of this entire thing, not just one little change here or a little change there. It has to be a conscious way forward. And I think, as he said, many of the states are actually embarking on this path.
Right. No, the example that you just gave is fascinating because this actually applies across different domains as to how most things are actually designed keeping in mind the male body or the male needs and don't typically fit women. And this sort of then becomes an excuse to exclude women from those spaces. So thank you for highlighting that. So let's sort of move on to the issue surrounding representation of women in the police forces, right? And you mentioned that one of the reasons why there is understaffing at the women help desk is also because, availability of women officers to man them, right? So just to look at a bit of statistics on the subject, right now the representation of women in police is around 10 to 11% on average across all states. But there are also serious regional disparities in this when we compare one state to another. Among the 9 different central police forces that we have, women, however, make up only 3.4% of the total numbers, which is very poor. And except a lot of states, starting from, I think there was a directive by the Home Ministry somewhere in 2008, which said that, you should inculcate policies of reservation for women in hiring. And this led to a lot of states adopting different numbers of reservation for women. I think it's anywhere between 33%, 35% at the top somewhere in Bihar, and goes up to some 25% or less in many other states. However, some states like Haryana, Kerala and Mizoram do not provide any reservation also. So keeping all of this in mind, my question to you is, how important is the representation of women in police to achieving the objectives of law and order and criminal justice? And I believe this needs to be answered because a lot of people assume that police is an objective, impartial and unfair force. It does not really matter what the gender or caste or dynamics of the force itself is. And I want to know from you why it really matters for achieving the objectives of law and order and criminal justice.
You know what? I've faced a lot of flack for saying woman police officer from many women colleagues of mine. But I say that as long as society does not stop looking at police officers as women and men, we have to take this stand. This is an entire process which is a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is not just specific to the police organization, but for all organizations across, right? So when we talk of reservation, right, when we talk of having more women, of course it makes a difference, right? Not just because of the optics, they gain more visibility. If you see more women officers, there is greater visibility, but also because it offers a template for the leaders as to respond to the needs of these women women personnel. I distinctly remember when I had joined UP Police, I think I was only amongst 2 or 3 other IPS officers, women IPS officers before me. Now, whenever a question of posting me to a district, district emergency force would come. And I'm sure the other women also face the same thing. There was actually not much of a template available to our senior officers to, kind of get the confidence that, okay, if she goes, she'll be able to control the law and order, will do the crime detection work, because that question mark was always there, right? So yes, numbers do matter because they offer visibility, they offer motivation to many other women, and they provide a template against which your performance can be judged, right? But when you talk of women officers bringing in a skill set, the skill word is important. We may have certain natural proclivities because it's said that the soft, soft skills are more visible in women, right? But again, remember what I said to your first question. It can be there in either a male. Yeah. So it's a skill. And the better part of the good part of the story is a skill can be acquired, right? It's not something which is, you're born with. You acquire these skills. You are born with proclivities. You are born with certain innate things. Skills can be acquired. So when we say that, when you ask whether, as opposed to the male personnel, do they bring in, women bring in such skill sets? Yes, they bring in a lot of things in which they see things in a different way, because it has been scientifically proved that the way a man thinks and a woman thinks is different, right? So they are bringing in diversity, and they are trying to, well, let me put it this way. They are bringing in diversity, but the problem arises when these very women try to blend with the system. They forget because many a times, in order to survive in this male-dominated organization or the police force, the women start behaving like the way men do. Many, many, many times, I've been asked that you talk of having more women in the police. And we find that at the local police station level, the women abuse even more than the men, right? So it got me thinking why they were doing this, if that was true. Fortunately, I have not faced it, right? So, and I came up with this solution that this would be, it becomes an issue of survival for them. So as a part of the skill set, they also need to be trained on this issue that, well, you can maintain your feminine qualities and yet be efficient and yet be professional. So these things are, as I said, you cannot talk of these in, disparate terms. They're all together. So as a holistic measure, they also need to be told this. Of course, their presence does make a difference, but the quality of that difference needs to be upped through proper training.
Right. And I actually want to come back to the point you mentioned on cultural adaptation that the women police officers undergo in the forces in just a bit. But before that, I would like to pose the same question to Mr. Ahmed also. In the sense, do you think police force, which consists predominantly of male officers, is inadequate in some sense? And do you think a reservation policy for recruiting more women officers is the way to go, at least until we achieve some good degree of representation?
I will look at it differently, Shri. The police is a service organization. It provides service. And who are our potential customers? 100% of the population, of which 50% is women. So if that 50% is to be catered better, chances are that if there are women on this side of the desk or this side of the barricade, as the case may be, then the service that we are providing will be better. I mean, even in a law and order situation, for example, if jostling is happening and a crowd of women protesters is being handled or mishandled by lady police officers, chances are that there will not be any outrageous act or a complaint or an occasion for an outrageous act. Or alternately, if they go to a police station to get a complaint registered, whether it is for a theft or for a sexual harassment or whatever, once again, the empathy that comes across if the victim is talking to a lady police officer is different if she were to be speaking to a male police officer. I am not saying that And as my colleague just said, that it's not necessary that the male would be less sympathetic or the female would always be more sympathetic. But the presumption in the mind of the victim would be that at least I'm speaking to a lady. So the presence of women and the larger presence of women over time is something we should all look forward to and encourage. And it is something that needs to happen. They obviously need to be trained better. Let me also add that there are many other social, cultural reasons why women police officers are unable to perform their jobs with the kind of efficiency that the system wants, their colleagues want, or they themselves want. You take the example of a lady officer who's in the family way. Now, obviously, there are certain biological restrictions on her, impediments, or whatever you want to call them. Now, the system has to have the resilience to accept that, to respect that, and then to give her that kind of elbow room so that her natural process does not become an impediment to her being a effective police officer. Another small example to what Sutapa talked about. There are women officers who have to go out on bandobast duties. These bandobast duties last for 10 hours, 8 hours. There have been cases where women officers who are posted for these bandobast duties don't drink water for 8 hours because they don't know how they will manage in case they need to answer nature's call. So and they end up with UTI infection and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is there are issues for women which are obvious, they are natural, and the system is slowly, very slowly understanding them. It is slowly adapting to and finding solutions for those problems. It is happening slowly, but it is happening.
Yeah, and I think just taking it on from where Javeed stopped, if the organization comes up with these, and I have no doubt that the women will perform equally well, right? Subject to personal, capabilities. And then, all said and done, organizations everywhere, whether in the private sector or in the government sector, they should be representative of the people who they are working with or for whom they are working with. So, and this is a very diversity, is a very, very common component of the ESG, which you hear so much in the corporates, right? So it's the same here. And therefore, I think inclusion of more women into the service, into the police force, is a very, very important factor.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. I want to actually take this a little bit forward by asking you both to sort of give me examples, of, I agree. I mean, just to take a step back, there is a perception in the society, even in the media, maybe even among certain ranks of police and the government, that the job is highly physically demanding and strenuous. So women police officers may not be able to perform it with the same degree of efficiency. But you do mention, I mean, I think that you rightly pointed out, this is also black mark on the system as such, which does not facilitate women to perform well within the given constraints. But having said that, in terms of actual evaluation of women officers who might have served under you, what has been your experience like? So have you found that women officers are able to perform better or equal to men, or are there certain deficiencies? In what ways does it play out while you actually evaluate the ones who are junior to you?
I think it varies from officer to officer, right? From personnel to personnel, even if you're looking at women personnel. Some actually may have a lot of domestic issues, right? So they will be encumbered to some extent. I don't think we can kind of generalize that, okay, it is no doubt a tough job. Policing job is no doubt tough. But women who are consciously choosing to come into it, they're also bringing the capabilities to adjust to the needs of the system and the demands of the job, right? But yes, not everybody can do that. And of course, there is that overall social prejudice against women in the... And it's so funny. Javeed, I and Shri, I remember way back in 86 when we went to the CADA, many people would just come to see a woman in uniform. It was such a kind of an ajuba, okay. So those social prejudices are always there. How far a woman can transcend them, right? And perform with due professionalism, that depends on individual capability.
Yeah, I mean, as far as individual lady officers are concerned, Sri, I have had the honor and pleasure of working with some excellent police
Yes.
officers who happen to be ladies. And I have had the occasion to work with others who were absolute laggards. So there are all kinds. And let me add that maybe the number of excellent field level officers is less among the women so far. Maybe with time it will change. And that could be because of their social cultural inhibitions. That is definitely something that I need to comment upon. Secondly, increasingly, I now find that before the women officers get married and have other issues of raising a family, of handling in laws and stuff like that, and their husband, their output is often better than what happens subsequent to marriage, because another set of responsibilities at the social, cultural, biological level come in, and that tends to hold them back a little more. Once again, we are aware that they get maternity leave and things like that, but the fact of the matter is that they have other commitments in the social context that we live in India, and that does inhibit them to an extent. I'll give you an example. This is many years ago. We were organizing a bandobast for the visit of the then Honorable Prime Minister to my constituency, to my district. There was this, obviously there were a lot of bandobast duties. I was going around checking everything, and there was this one woman, constable, who was at the duty point with a lathi in one hand and her baby in the other hand.
Hmm.
So I stopped, and I was comparatively young and maybe impetuous, less patient and all that. So I stopped the car and I asked her, how are you going to do this with a baby in one hand and all this? You think this is a tamasha happening and all that? So she heard me out. And then she said, you tell me, where do I leave my child?
Yeah.
Should I leave him under the tree? And what happens if he's injured or something happens to him? What will you do? Will you help me? I had no answer, because the institution, the organization does not have the capability, or did not at least that time have this capability. And neither could she leave her child at home, because that would because she didn't have a proper home. Probably she was living far off or whatever. So this example is just there to show to you the often the conflicts that come in the duty or discharging of duty of lady constables or lady officers, something that males would not bother about.
In fact, more than the physical aspect, it is these psychological and socio-cultural aspects, the expectations that it has to be the woman who has to do the care work. Things are changing, not that things are not changing, but this change is very, very slow. So these are things which inhibit, right, a woman. And to tell you the truth, a woman has to work doubly hard to prove that she is as good as any other person in the society, right? Because the lens through which a woman is viewed is so different from the lens through which a man is viewed. So we have to consider all these things before we become judgmental about, okay, is this woman a failure in this service, or okay, she's managing well, right? But it being a force and these being personal issues, many people don't want to enter into this aspect, or they don't feel the need to enter into these aspects, because the biases are so strong, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I have a couple of very important takeaways from the discussion that we just had surrounding, making the workplace more suitable for women to perform their functions. One is obviously that something like, having to bring your babies to work should not even be a concern when the state can provide crèche facilities and so on to make it more hospitable working condition for the women. But the other important one, which I felt is, it is incorrect to make hasty generalizations that this is a physically demanding job, so women can't work or perform well in this. I mean, it actually just depends on the individuals in the system, how well they are able to adopt and how well they can perform. And it varies, and it's nothing to do with whether, these are male officers or female officers. And that has been your experience also in terms of evaluating your juniors, as far as I understood. So I want to take this conversation a little forward into the culture of the police. And I think at the beginning of our conversation, Ms. Sanyal, you mentioned this example of how you found a lady officer to be more abusive than their male counterparts, because somehow there was this tendency to fit in and to become acceptable, because like it or not, the police culture is something which tends to incline towards masculinity. It rewards and incentivizes such behavior, right? So women will have to maybe ape such male behavior, so to speak, if I could put it that way, in order to fit in and be accepted. So while the government has made its state policy that we are going to increase women recruitment by reservation and so on, how has, in your experience, the rank and file of the police responded to it? And this is not just at the level of IPS, where I believe it could be much more conducive, but across up till the level of a constable. Have the men in the rank and file of police been accepting towards this change? Have there been conflicts? Has there been, how is the interpersonal equation really play out?
Well, I feel there would be some acceptance. Again, it depends upon how professional and with what professionalism you perform in your day-to-day duties. But there wouldn't be perfect or complete acceptance across. As you said, it's easier in the higher ranks, right? Because in the higher ranks, you're supposed to perform more of managerial functions, right? And leadership functions. And what I felt was, what my experience was, that if you are fair, if you know your job well, then people accept you. Your subordinates accept you. So fairness and knowledge of your craft are very, very important. Fairness in dealing with your subordinates, right? So that is very important. So far as you are talking of incentivizing masculinity, I would go into a further degree of these singhams, right? There is another level of masculinity, and unfortunately, that is what the society also does. You forget the organization, right? So the organization is a part and parcel of the society. And here the messages sent by media becomes very important. So to speak the truth, the police organization has been put to much discomfort because of these singhams. We have these singhams in our system also. So yes, it does incentivize masculinity. And so far as you're talking of the organization, yes, there is a need for support to the women who are, see, you need to understand that it's very important for a woman to speak up, and more importantly, to come out of the home, right? Even if you look at women complaining against domestic violence, it is so difficult to go to the police station, get a DIR written, and then go back to the same house. And these cases take eons, to come to a conclusion. What does she do? She becomes a persona non grata in that family because she has stepped out of the home to complain against the family members. So, when we take all these things into account, it is not very easy for women, right? If they don't have the right support systems, it is not. And we need to view the performance, not that you should promote lack of performance, but it should lead us to be more compassionate and start thinking about how can we make systemic changes. Because, I personally believe that the police may be looked at by society as, law and order maintaining people or crime detection people or this and that. But I feel they have great capacity to become change makers. But we need to give that environment to them also, right? And we cannot forget the fact that the ratio of police to the people, the citizens, is highly skewed in India. It's much, much less than in many other countries of the world. So all these things we have to take together, and we have to, design, and we need to do a bit of a design thinking for, the efficient functioning of the force. Then the things will, when we talk of equity, yes, certain more things need to be done for the women in the force to bring them up to the level, right? And we also need to generate the awareness in the society that looks, things are changing. And the society should also, contribute to these changes. It's not just the police or not just the organization per se, right? It's also the environment in which the organization is functioning. So I think, yes, both need to change.
Right.
Let me add, Shri, to what was said. You see, we are aware of the Vishaka case in that every organization should have this committee against sexual harassment, and there are consequences if someone were to be found, breaking that and all that. One unfortunate result of that is that at the lower levels, at the Thana level and at that level, the male police officers just don't want anything to do with the women. Why talk to her? Why ask her to come for the raid or whatever? She'll go and complain. If something happens, she'll complain, and I'll be answerable. So it's a very negative thing, but it's a reality. The result is that normally what she would be capable of doing, she does not have the opportunity to do, and then she gets into this thing of what Sutapa was talking, that she becomes extra Singham type. She'll start abusing and start being unnecessarily violent in the hope that by doing this, she'll get somehow co-opted into the so-called male domain of macho policing. In any case, how many male police officers are physically fit? That's another story.
Yeah, this POSH Act which you're talking of, Javed, I think there is a need to discuss the finer aspects of it, because there is an inbuilt system also that if the woman makes a false complaint, then she is liable to the same punishment as an offender, right? So there's need for more discussion on these issues. We try to push it under the carpet. But on the contrary, like if these things are clarified about the act, and the women are also made to understand that, look, this is a brilliant tool which you have for your protection and for a redressal in case a sexual harassment happens against you, and it is not to be used as not to be weaponized. And the men also need to be told that, look, the spirit behind the law. This law was to kind of encourage, motivate. I use the word cajole to bring in more women at the workspace, because as Javeed said, we all know the history behind the Vishaka judgment, but when Justice Verma sat down for this to make it into a legislation, a lot of other things came in. And both men and women in the workspace, they need to understand that they need to respect each other's space for a happy workspace. Otherwise, these aberrations will happen, which he just spoke of. They won't be taken for raids. They'll be losing out on when the ACR is written. It will be clearly mentioned that, okay, field experience nahi hai. Right?
Yeah.
So those things are there. It's a complex thing, but if we attend to all the aspects of it, I think we'd get better results.
Right. And just to add to it, and this actually takes me back to how we began the discussion, is that in addition to such sort of deliberate exclusion of women from certain functions, the law also sort of typecasts women officers by making them exclusively responsible for certain kind of policing issues, like, investigation in female related cases, or, staffing them at help desks and so on. So I want to know from you how good or bad this policy is. I understand the requirement for having certain women officers in help desk, but from a officer's point of view, does this impede my career progression? Does it mean that I'm not I don't gain experience in all aspects of policing functions? So this means my promotions are going to be held up or something like that? Or is it actually, in any way, is this affecting the broad basing of my experience within the organization?
I think there's nothing wrong with women specializing in something, especially in something that they have certain natural proclivities and natural advantages. There's nothing wrong with that. I think every profession or every area of work, there are some people who specialize, and within the police force also such specialization, if it happens, need not be discouraged. Point number one. Secondly, to believe or to say that their promotions would be impeded because of just being specialized in one area, I don't think that happens. Increasingly, there's a realization that if they are specializing in a particular kind of work, whether There are women who are handling, domestic issues, domestic violence issues, or there are some others who are very good at cybercrime, or there are some others who can do some other kind of, data crunching. A new set of people, a new, ethos is developing within the police organizations, and increasingly this kind of specialization will be almost welcome rather than be taken as something which is against the career progression of an officer.
Yeah, I think again that issue of leadership comes in. If the message clearly goes out that no work is inferior, like we have the economic offences wing, we have the investigation wing, we have the district emergency force. And so if this message goes out that, well, we need people of all kinds of competencies to make the entire organization work, then I think there is no harm in.
Right.
But much depends on what the message goes. If it's a different kind of message, then different outcomes will be there.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining this conversation with me today. To both of you, it was really enlightening and enriching. And I do hope Rohit Shetty does not get the idea to make a single movie with a female cop as a lead, because that is not what we intended, this discussion at least. But thank you once again for taking out your time, Mr. Ahmad Sanyal, for joining me on Police Chowki.
Thank you, Shri.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Javeed. All the best.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.